I am so excited today because I have the wonderful Jenna Leahy with me. I came in contact with Jenna just a few weeks ago when she posted a video. It was a long video. It was a presentation about 30 minutes plus on LinkedIn, and she tagged several people, and some of them I considered productivity heroes, people like Cal, New, Cal Newport and others. And she tagged these people, and my name was in with this group. And I was like, well, I like her already. I don't even know what she has to say, but I ended up watching this 30-minute video of her telling about the death of productivity. And I was absolutely fascinated. Jenna, I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. And, we were just chatting before we started this podcast. And when I first messaged you after you commented on my presentation, I told you you were one of my productivity celebrities. And I 100% mean that. I love your book so much. I have now read it twice, cover to cover. I just think there is so much good information that is going to help people lead more productive and purposeful lives. So thank you just so much for giving me the platform to be here today.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to interview you. So let me actually get started with the first question. So I had so many questions for you. I wrote them down. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. But you talk about the death of productivity. Tell us what you mean by the death of productivity.
It's a dramatic title, huh? But it's interesting. As I was going through this research, by the time I got to the end, I really felt like this presentation deserved some sort of a dramatic, serious title, because I really walked away being concerned about the way that we're currently working in our society. I think that so many of us, we have the best of intentions. We all want to be productive, but I think because of the habits that we've developed, we're actually achieving less by doing more. And in doing so, I think we're killing productivity, hence the name Death of Productivity. But even on a more serious note, I think that we're killing ourselves. I mean, workplace stress in this country amounts to 8% of national healthcare costs, and that's really alarming to me. So that is where the title came from.
Yeah. So in your presentation, you make this distinction, or, maybe it's a very small distinction, but you talk about the distinction between productivity and performance. Help me understand what the difference between those two are.
I think it's actually very, very simple. I think that productivity leads to performance, but because we don't practice so many of the wonderful productivity habits that you write about in your book, we're not actually performing at the level that we wish we could. We're just not doing that. And I think that companies are leaving a lot of money on the table, and people are living lives in which they are utterly exhausted and depleted. And I think there's a better way to work.
Okay. So in my language, I talk about the difference between achievement and accomplishment. Achievement is doing a whole lot of things, checking a lot of things off the list, but not actually making progress on big dreams and high priorities. Whereas accomplishment could mean working a whole lot less, using less energy, using less time, but you actually accomplish the things that are most important to you. It sounds to me like we're talking in a lot of the same ways of productivity is for you is, expending the energy and the time and the attention, but it's really what we're after is the performance. It's the results that we're going after. Is that a good distinction?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I'm intrigued. How did this whole topic of productivity in the workplace become something important to you?
Yeah, it's funny. In my presentation, I've always just been fascinated with the way that humans work, and with I previously would have called it being efficient. I once told my husband I wanted him to carve "She was efficient" on my tombstone. It's been a very important quality and value to me. And it's funny because I feel like for the first decade of my career, I did some of the things that you write about in your book. I think I did right. I've never believed that more hours equals more output. I've always carved strong boundaries between my personal and professional life. But I think where I personally encountered challenges, and you write about this in your book, is I was the squirrel that you write about. I would scurry from one activity to the next, and I would come home at the end of the day, and I knew that I had done 100 different things, but I could not remember a single thing that I had accomplished that day. And so I think I entered business. I attended business. I just graduated from business school. I entered business school really kind of pondering that and how I could be more productive as an individual. At the same time, 2 years ago, I started attending business school, and I started observing a few things. The first was, in business school, you start recruiting very early, week 2 of your 2-year experience. And very quickly, it became apparent that the quote unquote best jobs to recruit for, the ones that would pay you the most in terms of a 6-figure salary, were jobs that would make you travel away from your family for 4 to 5 days a week. And that would require you to work 18 plus hours a day, 7 days a week. I also started noticing that a lot of the language and the narratives that we would use to communicate to one another contain phrases like, I pulled an all-nighter. I case prepped last night. I didn't get any sleep. Or, oh, that problem set took me 20 hours to complete. And so we were signaling to one another that the more time that we were spending, the better performers we were. And then finally, we just started wearing busyness, and you use this phrase in your book, as a badge of honor. So to the point where even in our social lives, we were trying to be as busy as possible. I went on an orientation trip with my 25 members of my business school community. We went to Italy. It was amazing. But I kid you not, we averaged less than 3 hours of sleep a night because we were trying to jam pack our day with so many activities. But by day 5, I didn't know if I was in Italy or, I couldn't even enjoy myself. And so I created this presentation because I wanted to build a business case about why so many of these themes that I had experienced personally and that I was witnessing in the community that I was a part of, why those trends were wrong and how we could do better, both for ourselves and for the companies that I and my peers were about to re-enter.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what you were saying with when you first entered the business school. I am just curious, what was it in you that noticed that, these 18-hour days and 7 days a week and travel 5 days? What was it in you that said, I don't think that I want that? Yeah, they're the best paying jobs, but I don't think I want that. So what was it in you?
Maybe part of it, I was a little bit of an outsider. I had been an entrepreneur before I came to business school. So maybe there was an aspect of it of not quite being ingrained in sort of the culture, corporate culture, maybe that others were. But I think, I think for me, it was a conversation with myself and with my husband about, what is our purpose? What do we value? And are these next steps going to align with those values? And it's interesting because I think that you talk about the economic more in your book. And I think that it's not just in business school. It's for so many of us, we become convinced that we need to accumulate so much in order to feel fulfilled. And I think for me, it was, a conversation of, well, maybe I'll make a little bit less in this career, but I can come home to my family every night. I have time to go hiking after work. I mean, all of these things that bring me joy, I really had to connect with. And it's hard, Garland. It's really hard in an environment and in a culture in which the majority, is told, I don't even think they all believe it, but I think that we're all told we need to value something different than maybe what we actually do.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. So first, kudos to you for having the cognition to say that's, maybe that's not the life that I want, and beginning to call it into question, because so often what I see is people accepting the answers that their business school gives them or that their corporation gives them about what is important in life, rather than really taking a step back and saying, not only what do I want my retirement to look like, but what do I want my days, all those years and days before
Yeah.
retirement to look like. And that may mean a little bit less money. That may mean that I, don't, get the Ferrari or whatever that I would love to have, but I'm okay with that. And so really kudos to you. I think that's really wise to pick up on that early on.
Thank you.
Now, in your presentation, you talk about these 3 myths that you believe are causing so much trouble with productivity in the workplace. Tell us what those myths are.
Yes. So I spent a few months just throwing myself into research and walked away with, a giant stack of best practices. And I was trying to think of how to organize them and came up with the idea that there are these 3 myths that we consistently tell ourselves that are preventing us as individuals and ourselves as a workforce from being truly productive. And I think they're first, that we tell ourselves that productive people multitask. Second, that we believe that more hours equals more output. And finally, that we believe we should be collaborating all the time. And so in my presentation, I, presented these 3 myths and then slowly went through and attacked and stripped apart each one, because the science and the research is so clear that these myths are false and that there are better ways that we should be working.
So tell us a little bit about multitasking. You said that's one of the myths, right? We should be
Yes.
multitasking all the time. So what is the problem with multitasking and what should we be doing instead?
Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear what you've come across in your work, because it is so interesting to me. I feel like there is this narrative in our society where we tell ourselves we need to be doing as many things as possible at once. And yet, when you look at the science and the research, there is just so much data that shows that multitasking is bad for the brain and bad for performance. And I could go on, but suffice it to say, the average American worker changes focus close to 20 times per hour, receives over 60 interruptions in an 8-hour period. And even though, some people listening to this podcast may think, oh, I'm good at multitasking, fMRI scans reveal that while we can multitask, it's physically impossible to maintain the same level of quality when you're trying to multitask. And then in turn, I just think that as corporations need to see this as a huge gap in terms of what they could be accomplishing. According to the consulting firm Vance, American workers are losing 2.1 average hours a day due to distractions and multitasking. And companies are leaving $588 billion on the table due to productivity losses every year. So, to me, the business case is just so clear. And I think the answer is really simple. We need to focus on one task at a time in periods of flow, which means flow, which you talked about Cal Newport. He writes a lot about this. It refers to a state of full immersion in a task with no interruptions. And so we need to be flipping the way that we schedule our day and blocking out time for our greatest priorities.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be fascinating if companies, as they were writing a job description, because you see capable of multitasking, and I think, you see that on job descriptions all the time. And I think what most people mean by that is capable of handling multiple projects, right?
Yeah.
Like I can handle 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 projects at a time. But even the word multitasking, like this is something you do. And wouldn't it be interesting if we started going through and writing on all of those job descriptions? Oh, so you want to lose $500+ billion worth of revenue every year to your multitasking. I think of it in terms of multi-attention. A lot of times, what can I give multiple attention to? So I can fold laundry. I'm not great at it, but I can fold laundry and listen to an audiobook at the same time.
Right.
But today I caught myself, I was getting ready for lunch and my youngest son was talking to me. And my family talks a lot. We have a lot of very verbose people, but he was talking to me and really wanted my attention. And I noticed that I had pulled out my phone to check on something and realized I couldn't go back and forth between those 2 attentions. I either needed to give my attention to him and put down my phone, or say to him, you got to give me 1 second because I need to finish this off. So
Right.
I love the idea of multitasking. I think for me, the way that I've learned to address it or deal with it is not so much can I multitask, but can I multi-attention things?
Right.
And if I can't do that, then I just need to get rid of one of these things right now.
Absolutely. And I think, those folding your laundry or doing the dishes, those, my parents always get mad at me. I always call them and then I unload the dishwasher and make all sorts of noise. But to your point, you can do those two things. But I think it's, the other, and you write about this in your book, I talked about this in my presentation. Whenever we're interrupted, we lose it takes us 23 minutes to get back on track. And so, it doesn't really matter if you're doing sort of low priority activities like unloading the dishwasher, but if you're working on a really critical, highly demanding cognitive task, then multitasking has really serious consequences for all of us cognitively. So I love that term. I'm going to start using that. I love that.
So let me ask this. This wasn't one of the questions that I sent you, but what are some best practices that you're doing in your own life to help you focus in and unitask more?
Yes. I think one thing that I mean, we're all kind of aware of it. I mean, people talk about being addicted to their devices. But wow, after conducting this research, I feel like my eyes were opened to, even as someone who was informed by doing this research about the addictive qualities of some of our technologies, I was multitasking so much because I would pull out my phone to check my texts, or I'd check my email, or I'd be in an environment where someone could interrupt me. So just some small things. I used myself as a guinea pig. I actually only checked my email once a day
Nice.
during the last month of my research. And holy cow, I mean, my productivity increased. I didn't actually measure it, but in that month, I read on average a book a day. And that was because I just opened up so much more time for myself to work and flow, because I wasn't, giving myself those small hits of dopamine by checking my email every 15 minutes. I also write down my priorities each day before I start. I write down my 3 priorities, and I physically block out space
Nice.
in my calendar to focus on those priorities. So those are just a few of the habits that I've adopted.
Nice. That's awesome. So I'm curious. This is one of the questions I wanted to know. So you talked about these focused blocks of time that
Mhm.
you're using, where people spend time blocked out on their highest priorities. So how would you recommend that supervisors or bosses start doing this for their teams? Right. So different people on teams are going to have different times of
Mhm.
flow, but what I understand from your research, and what I love so much and was drawn to so much in it, was that this isn't just about individuals becoming more productive. It's really about entire organizations
Mhm.
blocking out worst practices and replacing those with some good ones. So
Mhm.
what would you say to a boss or a supervisor about helping their people get focused blocks of time?
Yeah, and as I was reflecting on this question, there's an element, and I don't know if you've come across this in your work. For some reason, I feel like there's still a stigma, or there's still almost a shame in openly talking about what we need as individuals to be productive. I think it stems from the fact that we don't want to admit to one another that we're not actually robots. We're not actually machines. We're humans. And we just face biological limitations because our brains work in a certain way. So I think the first shift is that I think companies, and teams need to actively have conversations about this research. And they need to read your book. They need to watch my presentation.
I didn't pay you to say that,
I
right?
promise. But, because I think that truly this is a strategic advantage for companies and for teams. And I think the companies that ask one another, or excuse me, the teams that ask one another questions such as, when are you most productive? How do you like to be communicated with? As a team, when should we meet? How should we operate when we meet to be most productive? I even have played around with the idea of as a best practice, teams creating productivity profiles that then they can pass around to their teams so that they're, clearly communicating with one another about these questions. So I think those are all ways that managers and teams can communicate. Some interesting examples that I came across in my research, I interviewed Jason Fried, who's the CEO of Basecamp. He actively at his company discourages his employees from instant messaging each other during the day. He thinks it interrupts their work. And he stole an idea from higher ed, and he has his employees use office hours. So their calendars are not visible to one another. Employees are encouraged to meet with one another during these set periods of time that are unique to each individual. And that then allows that individual to have all this other time to work in periods of flow. A really funny example that I came across was a manager who felt like his team was on all the time, texting each other at all hours of the night. And so he said, as a norm on our team, you're more than welcome. If anything comes up, anything that's urgent comes up, you're welcome to text me and other members of this team. We just have to add the word emergency in all caps to the beginning of the text message. And he said when he did that, it significantly diminished the amount of exchanges outside of work because people had to reevaluate whether it was truly urgent and important or if they were just needing that information faster than they did. And then finally, I would say, I think managers need to model this behavior. Don't come to work sick. Take your vacation. Actively communicate with your team when you are working in flow. I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of leadership and modeling for others what productive behavior should look like.
That's great. That's great. I love the emergency
I know, me
idea.
too.
That's great. That really reframes how important something is.
Yeah.
It's so I told you before we started recording, I was working for a church back in 2016 to 2018. And I had a small team that was reporting to me. And pretty soon after getting there, I designated my office hours. I said from 2 until 3:30 every day is when you can interrupt me for anything. Ask me any question, whatever.
Right.
That's also when I'll check my email during that time. And so, but I'm available anytime. But other than that, if you just have something that you want to ask me and it's not going to totally blow up your workflow for me not to answer it, then wait until that time.
Right.
And one of my direct reports just had this very negative attitude at first and said, so, you're telling us that you're only available for us for an hour and a half every day. And I was like, no, I'm telling you that you can have my undivided attention for an hour and a half every day. Like, I'm not limiting you. I'm actually giving you much more than most people would give you, most bosses would give you. But you have to reframe it and rethink about it because my most important work typically isn't responding to an emergency that you're having.
Right.
So just a really interesting way. I think a lot of times it's hard for people to accept the fact of, focus blocks of time and not interrupting each other because we're so conditioned that, oh, I have a question, I just need to go get it answered real quick, and
Right.
how interruptive that can be. So love those ideas.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too, which is that, it's an hour and a half each day, but the fact that it's undivided attention is so important to model too, because I think so many of us multitask, even when we meet with one another, and how much more productive we can be simply by communicating face to face where we don't have all those distractions is really, really important. And I think it's something that managers should actively be communicating and stating, my laptop is closed or my phone is away. My entire focus right now is on you.
Yeah. Yeah. If you do that as a boss, you're going to be an amazing boss. So one of the things that you talk about, and I loved this image, is the Bermuda Triangle of productivity loss. Tell us, what is the Bermuda Triangle of productivity loss?
Yes. So it's email, instant messaging, and meetings. And part of this came from research that I named it, but part of the research and the idea behind it came from research conducted by Adam Grant, who found that the average American worker spends 80% of his or her time in one of these three areas each day. And
Wow.
that was so startling to me because that leaves just 20% of the rest of our day to focus on critically important individual tasks. And so, yeah, it was, probably the most fascinating part of that particular triangle was the email piece.
Hmm.
I just became more and more convinced as I was doing my research that email was taking up a significant portion of our time, and I wanted to translate that into some sort of monetary value to make my business case. And so I pulled data. I think I used data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics and from McKinsey, and I found for an average worker in the business and finance sector, $22,000 of that person's salary every year were going to email alone. And of course, email is a very useful tool, but that's a lot of someone's salary to be allocating to simply checking and replying to emails. So, I think there are just some really minor tweaks that we can make in terms of how we engage with these three tools, communication tools, to really increase our productivity.
Yeah. So tell us a couple of your suggestions for
Sure.
getting away from the Bermuda Triangle.
Sure. So, there are three main pieces of advice I would give you. The first is, according to the law of behavioral change, you should make distractions invisible. So disable notifications on email, instant messenger, phone. Best practices for the best practice for working in flow, according to researchers, is to actually put your phone in a different room than the one that you're working in. Second is to, and I talked about this a second ago, is to set explicit times to check and respond to instant messenger and email. You write about this in your book as well. I just, even for myself as an individual, I had no idea how much time each day I was wasting checking my email every 30 minutes. And then finally, for meetings, there are so many best practices, but to keep it really simple, I think, every single meeting should have an agenda. Devices should be banished in meetings. We all have a significant habit of multitasking in meetings. And then keep meetings short and small. And one really compelling part of my research that I read in the Harvard Business Review is that meetings should never be used for updates, because updates can be sent in advance and then everyone can walk into the room ready to discuss and debate and make decisions, which is what meetings are meant to do. So communicate those updates in advance.
That's good. That's really, really good. I love the idea. In fact, I'm going to start doing this tomorrow because, again, I rewatched your video again yesterday and today, and I was like, putting my phone in a different room. I'm going to do an experiment on that and see how that works. Now, my one drawback is I have an app on my phone called Focus at Will that I love because it kind of plays some like ambient noise, and so I can put these headphones on and not hear anything. So I'll need to figure that one out. But I was like, I'm going to do that and just put it in another room and check it a couple times a day, but get it out of my line of sight. So thanks. You're gonna create a
let me
great
know how it goes.
experiment.
I'm curious.
Yeah. It could be fun or infuriating, probably both. So you just graduated a couple weeks ago from Kellogg School of Business.
Thank
Congratulations.
you so much.
Yeah, and there's more congratulations because you're getting ready to start a new job. So if you don't mind, tell us, a little bit about what this new job is.
Sure. I am going to work at Cisco Systems in the Bay Area. I worked there last summer, had an amazing experience. I promise you haven't paid me to promote your book. They haven't paid me to promote their company, but they were just voted the best place to work in the world this year. And I 100% think they deserve it. It is just such a spectacular place to work. So I'm very, very excited. I start in 2 weeks and I will be I'll be going through a 3-year rotational program on the people team. So doing what I love, which is helping leaders and our workforce to lead more productive and fulfilled experiences in the environment that they work in. So I couldn't be more thrilled and excited.
You may know a small thing or two about that. So I think that sounds like a great fit. So one of the things I'm interested in is you're going to be I'm assuming a W-2 kind of employee.
Yeah.
And so you aren't going to have complete control over your priorities or your schedule. And therefore, you don't have autonomy over your own productivity. So what are you going to do in the early stages of this new role to set yourself up to be productive?
That's a great question. You know, it's interesting. After I did this research, I think the most amount of pushback I get comes from W-2 employees who make that argument. I won't have autonomy, or I don't have autonomy. So there's a part of me that just wants to push back on that phrase for them and for myself, because I think a lot of the time we have more autonomy than we think we do.
Hmm.
I don't want to use, working for a corporation or working for someone else as an excuse for not exhibiting truly productive habits. The second thing I think about this is that I don't think that productivity and performance are mutually exclusive. I think that exhibiting these habits leads to higher performance, which is then valued by your manager, by the company. And so from day one, I want to start enacting some of the habits that I learned from you and many other productivity celebrities and authors. For example, writing down my priorities at the beginning of the day, blocking off time in my calendar to work in periods of flow, batching my meetings, embracing rest as an important part of helping the brain to be creative and innovative, setting specific times of day to check my email. So, really incorporating these habits from day one. And then the final, piece of this, and I think it's so important, I do some executive coaching on the side, and I tell my clients this all the time. Communication is so important. And so I'm not going to keep any of these habits a secret. From day one, I will actively talk about them with my manager, with my team. I really see myself as part of this mission, as I'm sure you do, to create a more productive world in which people lead more productive and fulfilling lives. And I see myself as being a beacon of change in that theme, in that environment. And so I think communication is such a key element of achieving that.
Yeah. Well, and I can say one of the things I appreciate so much about this is typically when a person starts a W-2 job, those first few days and weeks, they're setting themselves up for the next 1 year, could be the next 10 years of expectations that people have of them. And for you to very early on go in and say, I care about rest. I care about, blocks of time being set aside. I care about flow. These are important things to me. And it's going to make our department better, our team better.
Mhm.
It's going to make our company better if I do those things. I think there's so much wisdom in doing that very early on, and just kind of setting the standard early on that this is what I'm going to do, and how it's going to be. I hear the exact same thing from a lot of people when I talk about getting unbusy. They'll say, well, I'm not in charge of my projects at work. And it, to me, and I hope this does not offend anyone who has ever said that to me before, but to me, I think it is a cop out more than
Mhm.
anything. I think it's a kind of a lazy way of saying, well, I just can't, there's nothing I can do. When in reality, as you said, you have a lot more autonomy
Mhm.
than you think you do. Your boss is not over your shoulder 24 hours a day telling you exactly what you need to do.
Right.
And so make the changes that you can make, earn the trust as you make those changes, and then you'll have the freedom to make some more changes in your life.
I completely agree with that. And the other element of this research that gave me a lot of hope, I had a chance to interview Kate Lazareff-Puck, who heads the Future of Work team at McKinsey. And I shared with her my 3 myths. And she said, this is in alignment with what our research shows. And she said, I want to leave you with hope, because she said, I think in 10 years, we will be working in a very different working environment. She said the research on this is so clear. Companies are aware of this, and companies that start integrating these practices into their cultures, they're the ones that are going to attract the best talent. They're the ones that are going to have the biggest profits. They're the ones that are going to grow the fastest. And so she really believed that these changes were going to occur. And so that gave me a lot of hope too, that I think we can try to be the change that we wish to see in the world as individuals, but I hope, and I think it's critical that we have a top down shift in terms of how we view productivity and how we encourage our employees to practice productivity in addition.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is exciting. That's what you and I are both working for in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. So. Jenna, if people who are listening to this wanted to find out more about you, get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jenna Leahy. And because I'm such a productivity fanatic, I've actually deleted most of my social media. So that's pretty much the only way you can get in touch with me. But I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you just so much for the opportunity to be on this podcast today. It's truly just an honor to talk with you. And thank you for fighting the good fight on this topic, because we need voices like yours to be elevated in our world.
Well, I'm blushing, but and thank you. Like I truly am. I'm blown away by your research and the passion and drive that you're bringing to this topic. And so I hope that we get to do some more collaborations together in the future. That would be a real honor for me. So thanks, Jenna.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Garland.